In this video, we'll briefly talk about some principles of animation and then start blocking out our animation. Having our basic box start on the ground and then fly up to eye level, look around a little bit, and then finally do a 360 spin. Although our boot up animation will be quite simple, I think it's still good to acknowledge some fundamental principles of animation. These principles are widely accredited to the 1981 book, Disney Animation, The Illusion of Life. And we're going to cherry pick a few to help us out with our bucket bot action. But you can read more about them in a link in the description. Now within these principles, straight ahead and pose to pose are discussed as ways to animate. Straight ahead being chronologically, so starting at frame 1 and then animating all the way to the end, and pose to pose involving setting out our key poses first, and then in-betweening all the details afterwards. These principles were initially used to refer to traditional 2D animation, but are still relevant today with CG animation. However, there is another approach that's handy to employ in CG animation as well, and that is the layered approach. This builds upon the previous methods by building up motion in layers, usually starting with broader movements and then adding secondary and tertiary animation afterwards. This is a very powerful way to plan out your animation without committing too much time as well, and it's the method we will be using now. So let's start by blocking out the motion of just our root bone. Alright, it's finally time to start animating, so let's select our armature, hit Ctrl and Tab to go into pose mode and select our main root bone. Making sure our timeline is on frame 1 just by hitting the jump to endpoint button, and then commit our first frame. And we can do so by hovering over the viewport and hitting I, location and rotation, as we're not going to be really scaling this robot. And to make our lives even easier, we can engage auto key here just above the timeline so that whenever we move a bone, it automatically injects a keyframe. So if we were to position our robot into the first pose, so just resting on the ground, hit G and Z or Z and rest it right on the ground there, it automatically places the keyframe in there. Okay, now that we are all set up, we can continue with our second pose, which is up in the air basically. But before we do, we want a little bit of a wait, a little beat before that happens. So acknowledging the fact that we are in a 24 frames per second timeline, let's select our first key, hit Shift and D and move it over to roughly 24. So it's a second before any action happens. And this bar just indicates that between these two keyframes, nothing has changed. And then we boost up into the sky. So let's give it half a second or so, hit G and Z and move it up into the sky. It's also handy to switch on perspective here so we can appreciate what it's going to look like more through a camera. And again, let's rewind spacebar. Oh, that feels good. Kind of happens over the right amount of time. So after it hits that height, let's again shift D in the timeline here to give it another little beat before it rotates to look around. So let's tap R twice on the keyboard to enter into orbit mode and have the robot look to its left. Again, add a little beat here in the timeline with Shift D. It readjusts where it's looking ever so slightly. Again, another beat, maybe a shorter beat. Another little micro movement, and then just sort of shifts about, almost as if it were a human eye, which likes to sort of dart around to see its surroundings. Okay, that looks good. Another hold here, so Shift and D, before it looks completely in the other direction, just to fully survey the area, and again in the timeline, duplicate R key to add a hold, move ahead a few frames, and create a new pose. And hold a little less time, new pose. And then hold a little bit more. And now we just want it to spin, it feels safe now, it's looked at its surrounding and it's just going to spin 360 and return to an idle position. So after that hold, let's give it about a second to spin 360. And we're going to add this keyframe by using the item properties. So hit N on the keyboard, go up to item, and then rotation, we want our Y axis. If you're not too sure what axis the bone is on, you can go back to your armature options here and just make sure axes is checked. So Y is the axis we want. And we can just jump in and add, so plus 360 degrees. Doesn't look like anything has happened, but now we have a 360 degree motion. But actually what we want to do is to have our robot end up exactly looking ahead. So let's just change our Y to 360 and we can zero out the other axes. So it is level. Let's just play that through again. Up, look about, everything's safe, cool. I'll do my 360 and stop. And that is the blocking stage pretty much done. And the reason why we're taking this layered approach is because at this point, it's really, really easy to adjust timings. So if we ever want slightly longer pauses, or, we need to align it to another action or another element, then we can do so very easily. So in the next video, let's look at adding some more complexity to our animation and bring in some of those animation principles.